I'm now recording, and this is the morning of the 20th of August 2014. We're 100 years on from the generation of World War III. We've passed the dates for commemoration of all of the war deads, and what I want to reveal this morning is the tension building that is occurring out of our own august Parliament building in Westminster. I'm going to start off by reading the letter that I sent to John Paterson, who's listening to me in East Sussex and will be chipping in with affirmation and little confirmation that we've talked about things, that I've had our computer crash several times this weekend, or when we've posted things that we've written ourselves on Facebook with no input from the free press in Britain, that they just take down the links that we click on to reveal the financial crimes. Okay, so this letter was sent this morning. I'm just going to read it out to the list of recipients at the top. John Paterson, Evan Davis BBC, James Naughtie BBC, James Reynolds BBC, Mike Wooldridge BBC, Sarah Montague BBC, John Sweeney BBC, Steve Herman BBC, Today BBC, John Humphreys internet address, Hammond Philip, Foreign Secretary for a fortnight since we revealed that he was dirty in a financial services context in a video last week, and that is why he replaced William Hague, who was also dirty in a financial services context that we revealed last week. Okay, it's gone to the official Foreign Secretary's office, and I've received both from Hammond's Parliamentary Office address for his constituents and for his Foreign Secretary address receipts, which I'm going to read you later. It is quite alarming what they are trying to put into the citizen's head. And the last recipient of this is John Lamont MSP, because he still allows me to communicate with him as my elected representative, which is really generous. And I will talk about why I've put him in the list now. So I'm just going to read out the letter verbatim.
Okay.
Dear John Paterson, unpaid fraud exposer in brackets, I am just fine, but I got my computer shut down when I visited Lord Rothschild's transcript yesterday. Same Rothschild that got our Facebook references frozen on Sunday so that none of our friends or fraud activists could see Michael E. Moore's links to over 80 massive globalized companies like the P&O chain. That's Michael Moore, who's registered in Dubai and has resigned from almost all of those 80 companies already, as if people might be disclosing official secrets. I don't know whether or not that person is even related to the Michael Moore that is my representative in my constituency. Because he's registered in Dubai, it's very difficult to buy into that. The letter then goes on, and John Robertson writes links to Dubai and the Arab British Chamber of Commerce beyond regulation or taxation. We've already made a video on the very hard to find Arab British Chamber of Commerce. Did you know that Costa Concordia was owned by subsidiaries of P&O, and that his name in the native language is a joke about the KKK? I found that out on Wikipedia. You'd better look really quickly if you want the nomenclature that gets you to the letters KKK to be revealed about the sunken ships. I knew the history of the world's controllers and their capacity to sink ships in the lead up to a global war campaign. Yeah. So I want to explain first why 40% of Scotland's marriages fail, and how if you're a loyal, loving, heterosexual husband and are already your homeowner before you met your wife. You remember Greg Hallett telling the story in New Zealand, with all tiers of corruption in politics, sexuality and law enforcement, published openly online and in numerous videos with a man called Jim Fetzer and Red Ice Radio, etc., and Gordon Bowden explaining on an openly published video in our constitutional monarchy, telling us that Philip Hammond is dirty in the fraud sector. The story will retell our knowledge on the corruption of British law enforcement and the deployment of the same frauds by legal firms whose directors are advisors to government, or MSPs, called John Lamont, advisor to Salmond on law, but openly confirmed that as a politician he cannot confront serious fraud, but works for the Better Off Together movement. What I discovered yesterday that crashed my computer, I would like to reveal in a separate video. I want to talk about the globalised fraud and its owners, which Gordon would not talk about. Have you watched the video about the person who got his head cut off by an English-speaking terrorist in the Islamic Brotherhood, covered by Baron John Humphreys this morning, with no references to the 1300 Islam companies that were trading under the label ISIS last week, but have now been morphed because of the exposure of the corporations that trade under ISIS to ISIL this very week. The Lumi Bank from Israel, profiting from Gaza campaigners, most of whom are Facebook friends. A vast majority of the people that are our Facebook friends are campaigning for freedom in Gaza. The proceeds from all of that goes to the Lumi Bank in Israel. I've got Terry Waite's director number and the overlaps with the ITV media Ponzi's under the control of Lord Hollick of Notting Hill. Yeah, former media man, head of the media organisations, and now head of the Hambro Bank. John knows about the Hambro Bank's involvement in World War II and the Intel service and the deaths of 80 million people in World War II. The Rothschild man still works as a director and a secretary. This is the one who got me closed down yesterday. I'll read out his name in detail later because I cannot remember it. They're all so complex and so overlapping. They use all the corrupted boiler rooms and laundering crashing methods that we have described. But just when I was making slides about the same director listing the windmill link to Wadsden, where he has registered the company twice under different IDs, the one that is trading has a time axis in days. You know how I show you the lines, and at the bottom of that image that you can see on your screen, if you watch my version of this video, you can see that there are three companies called Oval Nominees Limited, Oval Limited. One of those is a director and one of those is a secretary. That's Oval Limited. They're Ponzi schemes. They are massive globalised frauds running right out of the epicentre of the Rothschilds dynasty. The Rothschilds are the likeliest people to be the most powerful owners of the world, as we learned from Hallett. Okay, let me carry on with the letter. The one that is trading has its time axis in days. That means it's a thin blue line, like those corrupted secretaries and money laundering tools that we talk about in all of the fraud videos that we made. You should learn about the war loot in the Victoria and Albert Museum. Oh no, I need to tell you about this bit. I don't want to send you this image or the ones of the fraud Bruno boxing joke. That's going to be in the next video that we make. Yep. There's a man called Bruno who's one of the directors on the Rothschild companies, and he was the head of the World Bank. And he proclaims to be a socialist, like Tam Dalyell, who's also a friend of Israel, has changed his name for convenience and owns a massive estate and has been a Labour Party leader.
They've just closed me down again, so I'm going to start this again.
Okay, I'm still recording at this end, John. So
okay, carry.
That's a very sensitive declaration that someone who's helping out with the Israeli banks and the defrauding and the building of the Knesset in Israel, who runs the World Bank for a time, who runs the central bank in Israel, and has been talked up by Tam Dalyell, the Labour Party politician who used to be, I think, a Conservative Party. Frank Bruno is the name of the World Bank leader. It's not Frank Bruno, but Frank Bruno is the name of the plant that was brought into the British boxing ring when boxing did not have to be paid to be viewed on the telly, and when people like Muhammad Ali were a massive threat to the tyrants before they doped him up or before he got his brains beaten out in those last conflicts. Okay, you should learn about the war loot in the Victoria and Albert Museum. put there by a man called Gilbert, part of the Roths listings, whose real name was changed as he shifted across continents in perfect synchrony with world wars. That's the Gilbert Art Foundation. All of his treasures, and I think you may be able to guess where they were laundered from, are now in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. His real name is Bernstein. No, not the musician in brackets. Okay, so drop me a line. We will make the video mid-morning if you are up for this. This is the Rothschild C corporate document and the thin blue laundering lines below, and these are the companies that did not crash my computer yesterday. Thank you for telling me Braveheart the actor was a Jew like George W. Bush and Harper in Canada, who were inducted into the Lubavitcher movement, and it's been openly declared by the world's news media that that is the case. You must not circulate this, because it might result in cross-border ethnic hatred, but please let the director numbers out. And then, rather cynically by my standards, show a YouTube video of the disemboweling of William Wallace, who was played by an Australian actor who you led me to believe is Jewish. Is that correct?
From what I gather, George, yeah.
Okay, that's irrelevant. What is being portrayed is the absolute, under the heel of England tyranny that has prevailed in Scotland, which is why John and I are making all sorts of new friends on Facebook. I could show you my Facebook page if you like. It's now covered with SNP logos, but not from Salmond. Salmond gets all my mail like John Lamont MSP does. It's from the foot soldiers who support Salmond and want Scotland to be free. Let me now show you the very distressing receipt that I received from Philip Hammond in response to that email. Okay. So Philip Hammond replaced William Hague because William Hague sent me receipts to all of my correspondence on all of the financial frauds that take in his wife, his sister, the Prince's Trust. And when Philip Hammond replaced him last week, there was a lot of false news about him with New Zealand people who have now joined me as Facebook friends because they understand the Mr. Bean cull the Anzacs in World War I joke that was perpetrated by Mr. Bean, who was actually the war correspondent for Gallipoli. But this is the actual receipt that Philip Hammond, the foreign minister, who's trying to create ethnic hatred against Islam, sent me this morning in response to my exposures of massive financial sector fraud. Okay, it's from fcorrespondence@fco.gov.uk. Thank you for your email. The Foreign Secretary is receiving a large volume of emails on Iraq and abuses being carried out by actions by the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant ISIL. No longer ISIS because of those 1,300 companies registered on the UK Business Directory, most of whom are geopolitical manipulators. Back to Philip Hammond's letter. He regrets that he is unable to reply personally to each one.
Yeah.
The Foreign Secretary shares the concerns of many in the UK about the suffering civilians in Iraq and condemns in the strongest possible terms the atrocities that are being committed by ISIL. This is a week after we revealed what Nadhim Zahawi does in the war crimes sector, along with Anne Clwyd and our entrepreneurial web pages, which have now been taken down. Those people have indicted locals for war crimes in Iraq. Zahawi is running a massive business out of the House of Commons, and he has hundreds of millions at the bank. Those are the declared millions. The amount that gets laundered using the techniques that we talk about in every video we make is undisclosable. Let me go back to Philip Hammond's letter. That's a week after my discussion with Sonia Poulton, where she accused me of making suggestive sexist remarks but she openly declared that she knows all about Zahawi but does nothing about it. We now have confirmed reports that ISIL continue to kidnap large numbers of people, mostly women. You remember the kidnappings in Kenya when I revealed the culparious Piso motives? Yeah, and credible information that women and children are being held by ISIL in a number of locations. We have confirmed reports that some women have been executed, possibly because they refused to change their religion, while others have been sold or allocated as slaves. This is all in the same week that we report the massive fraud involving the writer of this response and Zahawi in the brutalisation of Iraq. He's a Kurd and he has no conscience. He earns £500 an hour. We are, as a British MP for Stratford, with a director on his business registers named Shakespeare. They love to laugh at the peace-loving countries being their funding stream. Okay, we are also receiving distressing reports from displaced persons fleeing ISIL of family separation and their heinous crimes. We utterly condemn the acts of horrific violence and slavery reported being carried out by ISIL in areas under its control. Now remember that this is within maybe 6 months of Baroness Catherine Ashton with the...
Oh, don't mention that one.
Yeah, well, she was the person who was sent by the UN to try and find the democratically elected leader of Egypt, who has been taken down by the fascists that get funded by USAID to the extent of $1 billion a year. That's how barefaced and shameful these disclosures are, which are actually warmongering propaganda to perpetrate and create ethnic hatred, which led to the World War I, as you know, with the Brandeis Untermeier characters, and the appointment on the Supreme Court of Justice in America of people that were prepared to denounce German goods and to denounce, you know, everything that was happening in Germany. And then you know all about the sequestration of the people's gold in America, and all of the corporatism that went on in the lead up to World War I, where the president, who was Woodrow Wilson, who was also coerced in a sexual scandal into giving up all of the statements he had made of keeping American kids out of the war. In World War II it was over to FDR, and you know how all of those people came together, because Greg Hallett was a Skypey contact of mine, and you're an avid follower of what has led up to his murder. The campaigns of truth on the profiteering in wartime and in the illegitimate cause that is the British monarchy. We believe that Greg has died for that, and he's been replaced by a fraudster who is selling his books, and we've both corresponded to that fraudster in the last week. Back to Philip Hammond's letter. The government is working closely with the United Nations. That's Baroness, the woman that failed to find the democratically elected leader.
I'm glad you didn't mention her name, George. She makes me sick.
Yeah, well, it's typical of how people are picked for the roles. Did you know that the weapons delegation that found the chemical weapons in Syria was led by a woman called Angela Kane, who was also an executive at the World Bank, like the Bruno character, but decades later? That's how they do the dirty on the global citizens, by putting criminals into the head of the financial institutions that run the world. Miss Lagarde, Strauss-Kahn at the IMF, you know all about them and their crimes. Miss Lagarde's former bank, because Philip Hammond's worried about people that are displaced from their homes by violence from the Parliament buildings. She used to work for the Bank Paribas, which now issues credit cards to civilians fleeing from all of these brutalised countries in the Middle East, and the money ultimately comes from the Rothschild's banks that own every financial institution on the globe, and are particularly successful through the IMF, the World Bank and the ECB links, which they've taken back into the Frankfurt ghettos so that European parliamentarians need to spend half of their week at great expense in Brussels and half of their week in Frankfurt. That's the world that we live in now, and Philip Hammond is prepared to start another war to cover up those financial crimes. Let me carry on to the bottom. Internationally, the UK chaired an emergency meeting of the United Nations Security Council on 7th August. Do you remember, John Paterson, Jim Fetzer's bewildered response that the UN, nor the Cabinet, nor the Security Council can intervene and prevent war? It has to be innocent people who work for nothing, like you and me, who are the only people who are prepared to expose Zahawi's crimes.
Jim Fetzer, George, was the only one with the courage to have us do the show.
So he's interviewed us on that theme, and he was absolutely bewildered that it was down to ordinary people now, professors and people that are impoverished on their pensions. They're the only people that are prepared to try and keep the world out of war, because all of the world's banks are now owned by the world's owners, aka the Rothschilds dynasty, the monarchies, and the breeding elites that they manipulate in the bedroom, and then they manipulate the choice of our political leaders for the sins and coercion that they're able to back them into a corner on, so that they always do the wrong thing. Let me just read Philip Hammond's ultra hypocritical. This goes to every one of his mail recipients. The UK government has driven UN Security Council Resolution 2170, which was unanimously adopted at the UN Security Council on 15th August. This builds on our strong contribution to the humanitarian response to the current crisis in Iraq, which is bombing by America, which has happened several times now. This is the third campaign. George Poppy Bush led the first one. George Poppy Bush and Tony Blair and David Cameron in weapons delegations out of the UK were the people that provided Hussein with the weaponry. Hussein had 8 to 9 body doubles, and we know all about the story about his alleged execution and how that was faked up on video. They are in league with their friends. The only person that I believe was genuinely taken out was Gaddafi, because he wanted to keep the ownership of his central bank, and his people hero worshipped him for that. The cost of a tank full of petrol in an off-road vehicle with all those machine guns provided by the United Nations on the back cost only $5 in Libya, when the man that wanted to keep his central bank in his hands was executed at their hands. Okay? Let me just read the letter. This builds on our strong contribution to the humanitarian response in the current crisis in Iraq by providing measures to choke ISIL's recruitment. I told you about the directors in Aberdeen that were named Mr. Islam, and the fraud companies that were running in Aberdeen, where they're telling us that it is a hub for the training of ethnic terrorists. And I've explained to the whole world with Gordon Bowden how they make false news by buying up the whole of the ITV, the whole of the BBC, the whole of Reuters, and all of those people, because they're in trusts, don't pay any tax, and they lead the world into futile conflicts just to cover up the financial crimes of their executives, like Lord Markham of Ukraine, and like the Fleming family, who were part of that Hambro intel network that worked on both sides in World War II, and you, as an able danger activist, are aware of all of the evidence for that. They were even in league with the Vatican, and I can tell you now that the other denominations of Christianity are not innocent. The whole thing is about the money stream that it creates, and all of the genocides we have explained in a series of videos that we've made on the religious fraud for 2,000 years. It drives along the release of false news, and the only way that this can be changed is for the public to become aware that they always get austerity, or they always get conscripted because of the false news releases that Philip Hammond is prepared to send to people that know all about their financial frauds, to the person that is trying to reveal him as a profiteer in peacetime and a propagandist that could lead to World War III, which is the only intent that they have in making these news bulletins. That's the reason I sent the Braveheart video. It is absolutely cynical that what they've been doing in this country to keep the people in fear for thousands of years is what they now release on the telly. And the capacity to fake things that up like that and to be directly in touch with the training regimes in their secret places is bewildering in the extreme. Okay? And any decision to refer to the International Criminal Court must be made on the basis of what will be the most effective means to bring the perpetrators of these atrocities to account. We will look at every available option to ensure accountability and to work with our international partners on what can be done to both assist the victims and to bring those responsible to justice. Yeah, which is exactly the same statement that Nadhim Zahawi, Anne Clwyd and Robert Halfon, I believe he's the MP for part of Nottingham, where Robin Hood used to work for the poor people and take from the rich. Now the Robin Hood that is Zahawi operates from within the House of Commons with hundreds of millions at the bank, and none of the press or none of the foreign secretaries, the week after we reveal that explicitly with all the director numbers and all his listings from that parliamentary address, are unprepared to tell the truth about it in any shape or form.
Can I just say this? I've spoken to quite a few editors of national newspapers, and I've told them point blank they're going to be held accountable for their complicity.
Did you remind them that Lord Haw-Haw, who used to be a pressman in Britain, used to be a head man at the Conservative Party in Britain with Oswald Mosley, was the last man to be executed for treason in Britain, even although the Parliament building today is riddled with financial criminals who are laundering the proceeds from the taxpayers in the Treasury using explicit methods that we reveal maybe 12 to 14 times every week in the videos that we make and are openly available to the public. I don't know whether or not you've seen footage of the man getting his head lopped off. Have you seen the video that they've released this morning?
Yes.
And does it look convincing? Because you know about all of the executions in places like the embassy at where was it that Stevens was killed? Benghazi Gate. Yeah, the US Embassy never existed. There is no US Embassy in Benghazi. It's all false news. And do you know about the little scandal that they're talking about involving a chap called Ferguson?
Yeah.
There's some scandal that Obama's talking up in America this week. Ferguson, I've met him, was the former Governor General of New Zealand, where Greg Hallett came from. Yeah, and where the Governor Generals are in a state of panic because we now have told the world that they are more powerful than the elected Prime Minister, who, like in Britain, is just a plant for the moneylenders to manipulate the financial services and global banking frauds.
Well, we know the history and background of David Cameron and his clan, don't we?
Yeah, I will tell you something that I learned last night through the links that we've been talking about to Martin Sorrell and others, of the biggest incomes. You know how every one of the company check things, which we had shut down on us as late as last Friday, I believe it was, it might have been Saturday morning, but I've now discovered, you know how it says money at the bank on the front page of all the corporate registrations? I've found a bigger sum there than in any of my other research. and it's at the HSBC. Director named Kemp, also listed on the East of Scotland Development Agency.
And we know who launched the HSBC, don't we?
Yeah, New World Order.
His great-great-grandfather,
yeah.
Cameron.
And Santander is the New World Order bank. Yep. St Andrew never existed, as you now know. It's a joke. St Andrew is a patron saint of 19 countries. He's part of the religious fraud, which you now intimately understand, and you can see how they use religion to create ethnic hatred and to keep themselves safe under the cover of that ethnic hatred when they are actually perpetrating massive financial frauds.
Yeah.
So you got the picture. Can we stop there? And I can then tell you the more...
I'll stop mine now because they've already dropped me out twice and I've got 21 minutes here that's going to send earthquakes. Well,
I've got the whole thing here, but I just like to finish off by putting my Facebook page up and reading off the lists of posts. Let me just read the first paragraph of my website. This is the website, https://sites.google.com/site/Prof George Lee's Revelations, all one word, /home. Introduction.
Even if they just Google.
Yeah, okay, let me read the first paragraph. Introduction. Google and transatlantic governments shut my Gmail system down for posting these videos on YouTube, war crimes and trillion-pound dollar frauds. The first paragraph reads, the rebrutalisation of Iraq by America and British MP for Stratford on Avon, Nadhim Zahawi, registered address House of Commons, live in America on Jim Fetzer's podcast details. Okay, that's the video we made in America only a fortnight ago.
Can I just remind people, George, that Jim Fetzer was the last decent person to interview Greg Hallett before they disappeared him.
Oh, I might have been that person. He was a Skypey friend of mine, but he has been disappeared. And that is a tragedy.
Yeah.
And the suspicion falls entirely on the British monarchy and the British Prime Minister, who Greg tried to take his law case openly to them in the full view of all of the world's public and dozens and dozens of published books.
All that was recorded.
Yeah, I know it was.
He was at number 10 Downing Street delivering those documents.
Okay, so just let me remind the world what's in the first paragraph on my webpage.
Yeah.
This Fetzer podcast is the American expose and the vicious jokes on the wealth divide project. The second half is on older crimes in America that remain unsolved. That's 50 years ago they killed John F. Kennedy, the last president who had the courage to try and take democracy's funding back into democracy's hands instead of the private interests that killed him in the end. Only the people of the world can change it, which is why John and me focus on the people that are already impoverished and in austerity on the streets of the world. Yeah, it's the citizens that pay, and it's the people that send them to war that profit. The politicians, world leaders and money lenders who now run all democracy's sovereign debt are making a fortune as you watch your hobby on the telly. The next paragraph is below. You have an introduction to Zahawi's criminal hub, registered for all his businesses in the House of Commons. The company check site where most of our info comes from has since 17 August been ever so useful, but I am not able to cite it on one of my computers as links to the evidence get broken. They've now remedied that because the news is out that is censorship. Okay, now let me go to my Facebook page and reel off some of the topics that are openly discussed there, which are now capturing the interests of the SNP in Scotland. So there's Michael E. Moore and the links to the director in Dubai, where if that person had 80 companies and were not paying any tax in Britain, would be quite an issue altogether, even compared with the MP's expenses scandal. That's director number 911443671. Registered address DP World, Dubai, United Arab Emirates, where the Borders College in Galashiels has an outpost. Galashiels is where Michael Moore locks me out of his constituency office because he does not like the messages I am imparting on his director numbers. I don't know whether that one in Dubai is actually the same Michael Moore, but since Michael Moore resigned from the cabinet, all of those companies have been resigned from. Okay, there's another issue on the censorship of the Rothschilds exposures and the references to Mr. Wright from a place called Ednam, which is within 3 miles of here. He's the one that runs the Arab Chamber of Commerce, using a number of people called Scott that could have links to the Scott Foundation. Well, they do have links to the Scott Foundation and the Abbotsford Trust, and all of those dukes and duchesses that we talked about the ownership of my local region. Okay, then you scroll down a little bit further and you get fraud in British rugby, in local politics. Then you scroll down a bit to John Reid, Baron Reid of Cardowan. If you want to know why this man wants Scotland to be England's money stream in the better of betraying your people for profit sector, links to G4S, healthcare, Cheney and the Bush regime, but more importantly to Martin Sorrell, the global .com Ponzi scams, Princess Anne alias Lawrence, the Buck and Bland business empire, and the legendary Scottish rugby players who sold their game, it takes you to Sir Clive Richard Hollick of Notting Hill and the Hambro Bank. So I'm going round in little circles there. John Reid was the man who was in charge of various inquests, including the Chinook crash on the Mull of Kintyre, when all sorts of people who could have ended the Irish crisis were killed, and they were put on the same vehicle, which is a breach of health and safety regulations in the military.
George.
Sorry?
We've seen that before with the Extortion 17.
Yeah. Anyway, I just want you to know that everything that I talk about is up on Facebook, and I've got loads more Facebook friends, and some of your friends, and some of Greg Hallett's.
I've got some dear friends on Facebook.
Yeah. So you can see that what I want to talk about is not about individuals like Sonia Poulton or the relationships with the intel agencies and Gordon Bowden. What I want to talk about is multinational globalised fraud, which is really simple to understand if you stick to the topic. And when you read the response from Britain's Foreign Secretary, who was revealed as a fraudster by Gordon Bowden last week, then you understand how hypocritical this is, but you understand also what shocked Fetzer. The way that we stay out of World War III is that we share this with the impoverished people and the parents of the conscripts, and we just make them aware of how simple it is to steal from your citizens and then cull them in a campaign that is born under a false flag regime which is ethnic and religious hatred. It's been done for 2,000 years. We're now educated enough to stop it this year.
Let's stop, George. Let's stop.
Okay? Cheers for now.
You take care.